I encourage you today with any questions. There will be times where you'll be interacting today, but any questions you have, definitely reach out. And as always, my email and phone number are there, along with your mentors. So, I want to talk today about strategic thinking because it's impossible to do strategic planning without thinking that way to begin with. And in life and in work, I just believe that instead of being haphazard in what we do and being unmethodical, that we get better results if we're strategic about what we think and what we do. So, we're going to talk about that a bit. So, strategic thinking is very simply a process used by an individual in the achievement of a goal. And it can be anything. And I like to use the one of wanting to lose 10 pounds. If I want to lose 10 pounds, there has to be more than the thought that I want to lose 10 pounds. I have to have a plan, I have to have a strategy, and I have to have a way of managing. Of measuring that strategy to see if it's working or not. But it all starts with my thinking. I have to think about how I'm going to go about accomplishing this goal. As you guys look at what you're trying to do in the organization, you also have to think strategically. So there's a difference between strategy and planning. And I am not sure with no internet here. Yep. So our PowerPoints are the phone Wi-Fi is not strong enough um to play our clips. So that won't happen today. All right. So take a few moments to discuss how you have used or will use the managing complex change chart from last month, and I'm going to pull that up in a second, and then draw a correlation between strategic thinking and strategic planning. So, the first thing, if you guys remember, we talked quite a bit about this last month. I'm going to do just a quick review because I realize you probably have done a few things since we talked last month. Just a few things. But we talked about bringing about systemic. Let me see if I can mute somebody here. Courtney, I'm going to mute you there. There we go. We heard everything you said and did. Um, so, to bring about change that is person independent, meaning if you leave or somebody else leaves, the change sticks. And to bring about change that is sustainable over time and gets embedded in the culture, it's important to have a vision. Make sure everyone who touches the work has the skills needed, and that's from communication skills, emotional intelligence skills, all the way down to those technical skills, that there is the proper motivation. And for people in a public school system, motivation generally comes from being engaged and having a say in the work. And there's a whole process that leaders need to go through to make sure that people do have the right motivation. I'm going to tell you a story from some of my work just this week where I had a leader ask me, how do I get the people who work for me to take ownership of their work? I feel like I'm doing it all for them. And my answer was stop doing it for them. So we set up a meeting and did some work around having them own their work. I'll tell you about that later. Of course, you need to make sure they have the resources that they need. And sometimes the biggest resources that they need are the time to learn, the time to plan. Uh, we usually don't have trouble in school districts buying things, but giving them that time in a structured way is sometimes the resource they need. And then having an action plan. If you don't have these things, you get confusion, anxiety, resistance, frustration, and false starts. So I'm going to go back to the question that I asked, letting in Michelle. So, how will you, or how did you, or how have you thought about this chart in the course of what you do? And I'm going to start with Joaquin and then go to Greg and then Courtney.
So I think in terms of like how because I've been considering this since we last met, and then even last week when I met with my leadership team, like one of the things that we're discovering is that there's a bit of confusion, but there's also a bit of frustration when it comes to like us being a STEM school, right? So
Hmm.
one of the things that I'm encountering right now is obviously, our numbers, right? Increasing our numbers for next year, and there's only two middle schools in my district. And so one of the things that we're starting to see is that there's a bit of a competition that's happening between our partner elementary and then our partner middle school and us. And then now they've kind of opened the floodgates for there to be kind of open enrollment so that now elementaries can pick and choose where they want to go. So it's really about how do we leverage what we have as a middle school to offer if we are the STEM school and the other school on the other side of the city is a school that focuses more on like the ag science and the industrial arts. How do we leverage that? And so one of
What
the
are
things
those
that
words? They focus on the what now?
like agricultural science and industrial
Oh,
arts.
got it. Ag science. And
And
what
so,
was that
and
other
so,
word?
so one of the things that came up is like, how are we aligning our vision, right? Because I think part of what is missing is that if we don't know where we're going as a STEM school, if we truly are a STEM school, how do we then begin to align it? So that kind of came up in conversation. And this specific model was very useful for us to kind of put it together. So when I shared it with them, it was really about like, how do we then become a school that has a vision, skills, motivation, resources, and action so that
Right.
change can happen organically, right? And that everyone is a part of it. So that's how I'm using it now, like for us to continue these conversations so that as we get to the end of this year, we have a plan of action for how one recruitment will happen from now until then, but also how we will continue to create that change as we move into 26, 27.
Love it. Thank you so much. Great example. Greg and then Courtney and then Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the chart itself is a lot like, a team. And when you are missing a part or there's a weak link, in a lot of ways it'll crumble. And I mean, for me, I think that this chart really makes sense. In terms of the results related to what piece is missing. I
Hmm.
definitely agree with that, and I think that we've probably at some point all seen some version of these these outcomes when
Yeah,
there is that missing piece. So yeah, it's an interesting look, and I think that this comes into play when you're working with your own team, but also, like Joaquin was referencing, when you're trying to, collaborate maybe outside of your organization or create some vertical alignment with, we're in middle school, so with elementary or with high school, it becomes an even greater challenge because that's a lot more stakeholders to get on board and to
that's
make
right.
sure that they've got all of the things needed to make change a smooth process. It's often not the case, but it
Yeah.
is possible.
And then you said a keyword stakeholders. Even identifying who all the stakeholders are is a task that sometimes gets missed. So people get who need to be a part of this get left off. So thank you for that. Yeah. So Courtney, Kyle, and then Shauna Craft.
I actually shared this. I printed this out for my team here, my leadership team, as well as my two assistant principals, and we looked at it a lot after our last meeting. And with my leadership team, we kind of, with some initiatives that we're putting forward for next year, trying to get some things together and looking at the parts that we might be missing, so we don't have any of those gray areas. So we've had the discussions. In fact, I have a meeting with them again on Monday. And then staffing, like I have had to, I'm moving around some staffing and different things. And so I've looked a lot at about using this too, to not have that anxiety and frustration and those things coming up for the next school year too. That's where I'm at.
Okay. So does it help you just think through what you're doing? Is that what you mean by
Yeah,
cutting
just
down on the
think through
anxiety?
like,
Yeah.
how, who would be best fit for where, where, and having
Yeah.
that, knowing their vision, that a lot of them have met with me and what they would like to do later on. And yeah, it's just kind of, yeah, I liked it. So I've shared it with a lot of people.
Very nice. Awesome. Kyle, Shauna Craft, and then Brian.
I actually referenced this today, ironically, kind of with my own reflection because there's some concerns coming up among staff being unhappy with some initiatives going on. Not anything groundbreaking, but it's just inconsistent. And when things are inconsistent, they don't work. So I
Yeah,
actually pulled this out and I looked at it and I was like, okay, well, where are we right now? And I kind of landed down on the second one where we're missing the resources to make it happen. Where specifically, I'm talking about student discipline with cell phones and dress code and behaviors where, lunch detention, we can't necessarily do it. So we're doing composting or trash pickup, but then every kid ends up with the same consequence. There's no creativity, there's no positive reinforcement. So the
Yeah.
resource piece is missing. Everybody on campus has the skills, the motivation, and we have the action plan through PBIS, but we don't have the resources to make it happen.
Got
So
it.
now starting with our staff meeting on Monday, getting some feedback, and then going into a leadership meeting right afterward and coming up with some new resources and some new plans. And then rolling it out here in March, April, and May. So then come August, we have a finely tuned machine ready to go for the next school year. So it's actually a great tool to reference live and, current. It was
Yeah.
pretty great.
Yeah. Thank you. Shauna, Brian, and then Michelle.
So yeah, I kind of was thinking of it like Kyle was talking about. He said as a reference, but I'm kind of thinking of like as a check, as I'm checking things off as I'm doing.
Mhm.
Do I have these particular things? And so I think that helps maintain a focus so that you can see progress and make adjustments as you move along. So.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Brian, Michelle, and then Sandra, welcome.
Like the rest of the group, I've spent some time interacting with over the last few weeks. My school district is going through pretty significant budget cuts, and we had our superintendent left us in the last few weeks, so we got a lot going on here as we enter springtime. So I spent
So,
a lot.
so retired or went somewhere else?
Neither option C, got paid to go away.
Okay, all righty then. So do you have a superintendent right now?
No, you want to come hang out with us?
Yeah, sounds like a
uh,
fun place. Anyway.
I'll stop talking if I can convince you to come. But I've spent, just ignore the next thing I'm going to say. I've spent a lot of time in the resistance, frustration, false start section because when we have no clear person at the top leading and we're
Yes,
going through significant challenges and cuts all at the same time, it's really hard to do that. So
it
really
is.
serious, complex change in a time with a lot going on. So I spent a lot of time over in that little bottom right-hand corner.
Yes, and yes, and there's a whole conversation we could have around when change is thrust upon you and you don't have the opportunity to do all of this, which is what it sounds like you are talking about a little bit. Yeah, all right. And then I think we were at Michelle.
Hi, everyone. So part of this, I think sometimes we stumble on it by accident.
Hmm.
And so I think it's good to have something like this as a reference. I know I learned the hard way as a principal and all the right things, and I talked to all the right people, and I missed the school board and just, thought everything was okay. And obviously, my overstep and had to reset everything and rechange. But I learned a lot from that about how important it is to really communicate and communicate early and communicate often. And so
Yes.
the next time we tried to do a change, I started at the very beginning of the year with an idea that I had for the next school year. And all year long, every time I talked to them, I was like, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. And every parent meeting, every school board meeting, you know what I mean? Like everywhere that I went, I talked about this idea and what we wanted to do. And then by the time we got to the change, everybody had heard it so often, they thought we were already doing it.
Yes,
So
that's brilliant. Yeah.
communicate early and often, and then
Yep.
refer to a chart like this for who are all the key players. Like I made some assumptions that the superintendent was talking directly, and I missed that community, like school board piece of getting official approval. They all knew about it, but I didn't go for an official vote before we started, and that made a difference. So
Yeah. And I think you hit on another key thing is that you know, s- when you sit back and reflect on what didn't go well, it's some of the greatest learning that you can have moving forward. Um, that yeah, that can't be said enough. We tend to grow much more in hard times or when we have to learn a lesson than when things are going smoothly. So thank you for that. Sandra Alley, and then Josh, you didn't speak, did you? Okay, Sandra and then Josh.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, my camera's off, but I am driving.
Oh,
Yes, I do love the Nostr model. I've used it many times in the past couple of years, but now I'm using it for something different. I'm using it for I'm in a doctoral program, and my change initiative is going to be on, students impacted with trauma. And so we are going forth with some tier 3 interventions. And so now I'm using it with my staff for that. So
Very
it's been
nice.
very helpful. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. And aren't you
Thanks for
going to be
sharing.
speaking with Dr. Kidziora somewhere?
Yes. And so I need to definitely talk to him because we need to kind of touch base. So yes, we
Yeah.
are.
So tell the group where you're gonna be live so they can pay to come see you.
I will, except I don't know where we're going to be. But once I find out, I could let them know. But me and
Okay.
Dr. Kidziora need to talk about those things.
Okay. All right.
But
Very good. All right,
thank you.
Josh.
Okay.
Yeah, as I looked through this last time, and even today, I changed Forest Palm in my last district, and the vision was never there, and it was a lot of things were missing, and it ended up with a lot of false frustration and resistance from my staff, and it was STEM related, so I understand that aspect, but this year it's a bunch of small changes at my school site, and even kind of we don't have a mission or vision statement. We're kind of my staff jokes are redheaded stepchild of the district because we're 3 schools on one 49-acre property. You drive past us to go to the high school, people miss us all the time. And we're talking about branding. And then, I was in the teacher asked to meet, just talk about things themselves. And I said, great, go ahead, do it. And I was working on my next staff meeting about developing a mission and vision statement. But I had planted that seed with 2 pretty influential staff members before I got that going. And they came back to me, they had their mission, their vision statement, but that allowed me to go back to the next staff meeting, give them the skill sets, went through Cynic's Andrew Cynic's video on a mission and change, and kind of give them the skill sets. Does this meet these standards? And my staff is already motivated, so we're moving in that direction that way. But once you get all those things aligned, you do see change. But if you're missing one step, I've seen it at my last site when it
Yep.
was top down driven, and I had no choice in the change. And it didn't end well because for me as a leader, I want my change to be lasting after I leave. And if you don't
Yeah.
get people bought in beforehand, the second you leave, your change is gone.
Yeah. Tell me again what your school is that people miss. I can't remember.
I'm middle school. I'm Durham Intermediate School, and literally as you drive into our district, we're on 49 acres, all 3 schools.
Yeah.
Across the parking lot is my elementary school, and then if you go into our parking lot further, you drive past my site, and then you turn, and that's the high school site right there. And
Hmm.
we have no signage, we have nothing, no branding or vision to define what we do and who we are. So I'm working with a muralist to bring a mural in.
Yeah.
The ag mechanic shop is making a big, nice metal sign for out front. So
Nice.
really bringing the community's eyes on this is where we are and this is what we do.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice. All right. So thank you all for that. I wanted to talk for just a minute and tell a story about motivation. And it's not going to be directly what any of you do, but you will be able to suss out the message here by the story that I tell. So I was working with an HR department last week, and I've worked with them for a while. And the person who is the head of the HR department is extremely linear and very organized. And has everything in spreadsheets and Google Docs where people put in what they're supposed to do and where they are in the process and all of that kind of stuff. All of that is very organized. The thing that's missing that she is talking to me about is they rely on me to put things in their sheets, and they should be the ones putting things in their sheet. So I'm going to make a very long conversation short. I said to her, people need to have agency in what they do. The reason they're disengaged is because you're doing their job for them. They're just following orders. They're disengaged. They have no care because they don't have any input into the system. So we set up a meeting and I asked her to let me facilitate it so she could be part of the team. And we picked a process and we went analog. We had chart paper. That's very significant because when you have people and you're doing planning, brainstorming, and you need people to get engaged, um, the way people sit and the way the energy flows helps determine the outcome. So all of them were sitting in a semicircle facing me with the chart paper behind me. So they're all looking at the same thing. We talked about what is going well with this particular process and what's not going well. And they each had a say. I told them that the assistant superintendent was sitting with them so she could be part of the team. She can't facilitate and be part of the team. And what it led to was them talking about what they do that's working, what they do that's not working, what they would like to change. And I had already front loaded the assistant superintendent that you should always be the last to speak because what you say will affect what they do. By the end of the meeting, they all had talked out their own problems with me prompting them with questions, saying some hard things, and all of that. But we'll continue this work, but that is the motivation that people need to be engaged in the work. If you simply tell and don't ask and give people a say and agency, they're not going to have the motivation to do it because why would they? They're simply almost like an assembly line worker, just doing what they're told. And that gets very old and very boring. And the work that you guys do and the work that all your stakeholders do is thought work, it's creative work. They need to be engaged. So, any thoughts on that? Jump on in. So, the next thing I'm going to ask you, how many of you are a school to watch? Where are you in the school to watch self-study process? If appropriate, have you been through it or not? So let me just ask you real quickly. Michelle, are you a school to watch or going for it? She might have stepped away. Sandra, how about you?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
We just finished our third year and redesignating now. So yeah, we just finished that process.
Okay, Kyle, are you guys in it at all?
Not in it, but very excited to have my school recognized for this. So it's definitely something we want to do next year.
Okay, all right. And Greg and Joaquin, are you guys in it?
No, it was something I was maybe going to try and pursue for next year. And that, I mean, Shauna crafts on my site too. So,
Got it.
yeah, at this point, no.
It's a good thinking tool. That self-study, I mean, it really is. Joaquin and Courtney, are you guys in it?
Yeah, my school is a school to watch. This was
Okay,
our first year of going through it. So yeah.
nice. Courtney?
No, mine is not, but we are looking forward to it for the years to come.
Okay. All right. So how will you use the strategic thinking and planning in this process? So as you look through, I asked a question, I'm going to answer it for you. As you look through that self-study, I would encourage you to look through it. And those of you who are already in it, you know this, look through it and kind of internalize it before you actually start doing it with your staff. Use the Nostra model or something like the Nostra model to think about how strategically you will bring all the stakeholders along in this process because it's essential. And then what process will you use to gain consensus throughout this or any improvement process? I'm going to ask Sandra and Brian, the two mentors here, what process have you used consistently to get consensus? That doesn't mean total agreement with anything that you have wanted to do. And Sandra, I know you're driving, but can you talk still?
I can. The way we used it in the last 3 years, the self-study, and then how I gained that consensus is we look for areas where we needed to improve, and we kind of made those our goals for the year. And the consensus kind of it's kind of a natural process, to be honest, because it's like all the teachers took the survey, and then we found out areas of deficit that we wanted to improve. And then I used my department chairs to really push it through to all the different departments. And then with consensus, that really wasn't a problem at my site because they all agreed upon all the different areas that we needed to improve once we took the self-study. So it kind of, again, it was very, very natural. It was just a natural process.
Nice. Thank you. And then Brian.
Yeah, I would agree with what she said, and I forget who it was earlier who mentioned talking with a couple of key staff members up front. And so I think if you front load a little bit and plant some seeds, that sort of makes it organic, and you can kind of let the conversation lead to where you think it might. But then also stepping out of the way, so setting it up, structuring it, and then getting out the way, and then coming back in to sort of help clean it up at the end. At least that's where I've had success.
Absolutely. That getting out of the way is a key important part because as leaders, we want to fix things and we want control. And one of the scariest things for me when I was a new leader was relinquishing control. And once you realize that the only control you have is your influence and that you never really had control, your leadership, your leadership journey becomes a whole lot easier. But you do need to facilitate a process and have a way of leading people to thinking strategically. So thank you for that. So here are ways that you can cultivate strategic thinking. Number one is learn how to articulate your goals clearly. Being an HR person, the thing that I know is that the hardest thing for leaders to do quite often is to get this vision that they have in their head into concise, concrete words that people can see almost like they're watching a movie. A lot of times the vision is squishy in their head and they have a feeling about it, but they don't clearly know how to articulate it. So getting that down is goal one in being able to think strategically. And just like if you're trying to write a paper or a book or something like that, quite often you go through many iterations of what the goals clearly are before you can narrow it down to something simple enough that people can understand it and be able to follow it. Okay, and we're not going to be able to do that because I'm at a place with no Wi-Fi. And let's see if we can get, okay, we can't get any of the clips. Okay. So number two, research and identify options to reach those goals. So while as a leader, you don't want to dictate the how, okay, let's say the goal is we're going to be a school to watch, or the goal is we're going to implement this change. The how should actually come from the people who do the work. But you shouldn't just stand up there as a leader and say, how do you think we're going to get there? Researching and identifying some options and throwing them out when appropriate is what a leader does. But the thing you don't want to do is take ownership of the options because the options of how to get there might just spur on the conversation for people and you end up doing it a completely different way, which doesn't matter as long as everybody is headed toward the goal. But you really do need to have some ideas about that. And in the age of AI, I don't know if you're using it at all, but there is no shortage of ideas and research. So analyze the possibilities and risks objectively, and you want to do this with your team, and you want to talk about these things openly. A lot of times leaders will be privy to information, not confidential information, but information that everybody is not privy to. And when you're talking about what we can do versus what we can't do, make sure that as a leader, you're telling the whole story, telling people why you can't do something, either because, the boss said we can't, or it's illegal, or fiscally we can't do that. This one HR group I was talking to last week that was having trouble with motivation of the team, one of the things the director said was, when I tell a principal that we can't, the principals are always blaming us for what we can't do. For example, somebody's out on a leave and they keep getting extended leaves and there's nothing illegal about it, but it's very frustrating for the principal and what they want HR to do is go and hire a new person, which they can't do. Most everybody's in budget cuts. So the director was saying to the principal, I'll take that under advisement. That's a very, very wrong answer to give someone. I said, why would you say that when you know that you can't do it? Well, I just like to keep it open. I said, that's misleading. It's untruthful. Tell people that you can't afford it. You can come along beside them and say, we feel the frustration that you feel. I understand that it's difficult for kids. It's difficult to have a consistent sub. It's difficult to know what you're doing with that classroom when people keep getting extended leaves. However, we do not have the budget to pay two people for the same position. I do feel your frustration, however. So Talk very clearly to people about risks, what you can do and what you can't do. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't leave people in this squishy position about not knowing what's going on, no matter what the situation is. Okay, strategic planning. Again, we can't watch the video because I don't have internet. Okay, so here, decide on a course of action based on your research and your analysis, meaning put some thought and time into it. Create an implementation plan. That's the action plan from the Nostra model. Make sure that people at least know what step one is of your action plan. Your action plan, if you think about it, it's in pencil, it's not in stone. Because if you do step one, you don't want false starts. You want everybody to be clear after every meeting, after any time you sit and talk to somebody and you're talking about doing something, everyone who leaves that room should know clearly, and it should be documented, who is going to do what and by when. How will we know it's done? And if the person runs into trouble, who are they to contact for help before the deadline? All of that should be talked about upfront in the implementation plan. As you work through any action plan, quite often you will recognize that things shift. What you had planned is not really appropriate anymore. The world changes. So you also talk about what to do if things change. And if things need to change, you bring the group back together. You talk about why. You talk about why it's changing and what's going to change. But everybody needs to be clear about what step one is. And that will help inform step two. That will help inform step three. You can't fully say we're going to do steps 1 through 10 and there are going to be no changes because the world moves too quickly. And being a learning organization is something I used to call it. Now I call it being a responsive organization. And when your team knows how to come together and systemically talk and strategically talk about things, making these small pivots and learning where the risks are coming from and why you need to make those changes just becomes part of how you do business. And I can't think of any organization where things shift more quickly than in a school system. So adapt and adjust along the way, which is what I was just talking about. So as you take on strategic thinking and evaluate them, it allows you to clearly articulate why certain decisions are made. And I don't remember who said it. Was it you, Courtney, who said communicate, communicate, communicate? Was that you? About you can't, somebody said that. No, who can't remember who that was. Who was talking about that about, was it you?
It wasn't me, but I think you can't I mean, yeah, communicate as much as you can.
Yeah, but who was it? It was another, who was that? Was it you,
I think it
Shauna?
was no, I think it was Sandra.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, somebody said it, but somebody was talking about how they were talking to their teachers about at parent meetings, we talk about it. At this meeting, we talk about it. So that when the change initiative was implemented, people thought you were already doing it. Somebody said that. I know I didn't dream that. Was that you, Sandra? Somebody said it, Shauna. All right. But anyway, definitely articulate why decisions are made. In public education, I've said this many times before, we are good at starting things. We're not good at ending things. So what happens is people lose trust in the system. When programs, when policies, when what's important changes from year to year, and there's not communication about why, you get people who get jaded and say, this too shall pass. Why should I invest time and energy into this when next year it's going to be something else? Also, what we don't do is planned obsolescence, meaning telling people what we're taking off their plate. And my director one year actually took a plate and had sticky notes on there. And we had a meeting with the department, and he physically said, we're taking this off your plate. We don't do this anymore. We're taking this off your plate. It was a visual, but it also showed them that you don't have to think about all these things. We're going to clearly articulate to you what is important now and why. So don't don't spoil trust in the system by not articulating why you want to do the change. As well as if you're putting something on the plate and you're making a change, clearly have a formal verbal burial of what's no longer important. And leaders can use sound logic to influence naysayers' points of view or persuade key stakeholders to approve decisions when you talk and communicate clearly and strategically. You know, the one skill that every leader must have is the ability to influence and persuade, and that only comes from clear communication, and that comes from clear thinking. Clear thinking comes from spending time outside of the noise, outside of the time when you're face to face with people, and outside of the time when you are ingesting content. And I get into this rut a lot as well, where I'm constantly ingesting content, and I'm recognizing that I'm out of balance and how much time I'm really processing what that means for me and my work. So what that means for you as a leader is that as you ingest content and learn, because you do need to do that because the world is moving fast, pause frequently and say, what does this mean? Why is this significant? And how can I clearly articulate this to key stakeholders so that I have less resistance to the changes that I know are needed for the organization to move forward in an efficient and effective manner? And then the ultimate benefit of it is that you demonstrate the ability to articulate a vision and leverage the vision to lead. It also helps you really put into perspective the risks to what you're asking people to do and prioritize your options. Reduce the margin of error or chaos when you're thinking strategically. Because if you're not thinking strategically and you just kind of do this shotgun effect of, let's try a bunch of things, there's going to be a lot of error and there's going to be a lot of chaos. And it's hard for people to track with you when that's the way that leadership goes. And it also helps you embrace and confront unknowns when they happen. When those things happen, if you are a responsive organization and you think and lead strategically, people know how to pivot during those times. They don't see it as well, we had mapped out steps 1 to 10, and now we got to change step 3. Oh my. It helps leaders identify various options to achieve the same goals, simplify complex problems by breaking them down into digestible chunks, and understand the worst case scenarios to prepare for adverse outcomes. That one is really, really important and frequently not given the time that it should in strategic meetings. Talking about what could happen and what will we do if. That's very different than people coming in saying, we tried this before, I know it won't work, or we shouldn't do this because. It's something that happens when the process is in full swing and everybody's positive about it. You can talk about preparing for adverse actions in outcomes in a positive way without it being a negative conversation. So I would ask you, how will you become more strategic in your thinking, and how will you use that mindset to lead your staff in the improvement process? So I'm going to stop sharing and let you share out as we end our day. So any thoughts that you have from today about strategic thinking, planning, and communicating? And I'm going to start with Shauna Craft and then go to Sandra Alley and then Joaquin.
All right. So, you know, to me, I like when you said like strategic planning and strategic thinking are two different things because that's not something that you really think about. You think they go hand in hand, but they're not, they can be separate things. And
Yeah,
so, a lot of times I think that strategic thinking has to come before we do some strategic planning. And so
right.
that was just a nice thing to separate those two.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sandra and then Joaquin and then Courtney.
I liked what you said about being a responsive organization. That was such a great reminder and how I'm going to go forward to finish off this year and then next year, because I think too, lots of times like our staff right now, I mean, teachers and staff, they look exhausted, and the
Yeah.
more we can be more responsive to needs of students, families, and staff, it makes everything easier. Just how you said, it has to be concise and it has to be well planned out.
Yeah.
100%. So thank you for that reminder.
And I told the story last year. I don't think I told it this year, but there was a man who was an interim assistant superintendent for a school district. And during that time, his wife became very ill, like really debilitated. The time that he was there, the team got very attached to him personally and professionally and cared about him as a human being. So they hired a full-time assistant superintendent, and he had done a lot of planning and strategic planning with this team, and he was doing his handoff meeting to the newly hired assistant superintendent. As he was doing his handoff meeting, he shared with the team that his wife really was not doing well, and that they were going to be dealing with some long-term health benefits, which and the team was rightfully compassionate for him. The newly hired assistant superintendent got up and went right back to the business agenda without taking a break, without taking a pause, without a transition or anything else. Can you imagine how that felt to everybody in that room? Well, you can, and I will tell you. They thought, does this person have no social awareness? It set that person up for failure from number one. That person, even though there was an agenda, of course, you all know this, I'm preaching to the choir, should have said, my goodness, I know that everyone will want to spend a few minutes with you before you leave. We're going to pause. Don't care what we finish the rest of the day, but we're going to give people a chance to connect with you. Because by doing that and not showing respect and not giving any time or recognition of that, she lost the crowd. She lost the crowd in that moment. So yes, we always have to be the work will be there. Anyway, that was just a story. Joaquin and then Courtney.
Yeah, I think what's resonated, and I think we can all attest to it, right? But what resonated was what you mentioned when you said like in education, we're good at like starting things but not finishing things. So I
Yes.
think that's often why so many often get burnt out. And this belief on the fidelity of like how we actually lean into something because it's something that we're going to start and then eventually it's just going to fall down the wayside and we're going to start something else. And also the idea, right, that you have a leader in place and then the leader might be there only for a couple years and then he or she moves on, somebody else comes in, and then they bring in something new. And that's something that I've always told my staff, right? Like we have to be able to create something in the event, right, that in whatever time, right, I move on or I'm no longer here, can we continue the things that we've been able to put into place and have a trajectory of these are the things that we've done to continue it. So when the next person comes in, he or she can see that these are things that are working, right? That they're solid and that teachers own it because
Hmm.
I can own it, but if I leave, I'm taking what I own, right? And it's if it stays behind, nobody has the opportunity to really take it to themselves. So that for me has been staying kind of like resonating with me, but it's also thinking about like the idea of like how we ensure that we listen and we communicate. I'm reading The Listening Leader right now by Shane Zafir, and that's been very helpful in terms of like how we communicate, but also how we internalize what information we're getting from the people that we work with and support. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Courtney
I
and then Brian.
I agree with Joaquin about, we are good about starting things and not finishing them. That was what key thing I put on my paper as I was taking notes. But I really, I think I think pausing is really powerful nowadays. We have so much coming at us, and you've mentioned that a lot of times. But just thinking about all the people the stakeholders that we have to inform and communicate with. But I have paused a lot this year, especially we've had some really hard things on my campus with some of my staff and students, and I've had to just really recognize to stop and slow down and think about how I'm going to effectively communicate what's going on with all the people that are involved. So there's just been some hard things like that. And I do like the idea of telling the whole story of every initiative that and taking things off their plate and making
Yeah.
sure that they are invested in what your vision is.
Absolutely. Thank you. Brian, and then Greg, and then Kyle.
I mentioned it earlier, but the idea of building the system, setting it up, and then sort of stepping back and getting out of the way. I think once it's our baby, your instinct is to hold on tight and micromanage your way through every part of the process, but that doesn't allow the buy-in to be built organically. So I think it's really important to set it up, do it really well, be thorough, and then get out of the way and let it happen, and then be there to guide along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you. Greg, Kyle, and then Josh.
Yeah, I also think like the benefit of including team members in your planning process, I think is always going to create a little bit more buy-in. It feels less top down, like, whatever principal or superintendent or whatever leadership is in place at the time, they're not going to, feel that kind of top-down mentality. Like, I'm the genius that came up with this idea. Now let's all go do it. I think that letting people in and being a part of that process, whether or not, I mean, I agree with Shauna that, strategic planning or thinking would need to come before strategic planning, but letting people in that process can be a powerful thing, because they want to. I would say that most staffs, at least a majority of people are there for the right reasons and want to do right by kids and want to see their site improve. And sometimes in a leadership position, it could be hard to release that control. But I think ultimately it ends up being a good thing for you to do so. And so that was one of my takeaways.
Thank you. Absolutely. Kyle, and then capstone expert, and then Josh.
Get out of here. No, but listening to what Brian said, it actually reminded me of when we were in Tahoe and one of the presenters talked about getting on the balcony and observing all the systems in place. Um, I don't do that enough because I'm so new and so like eager to get things going. But like recently I learned it was over a small thing, and I'm so happy I was, but I didn't do the strategic planning. I just came up with this great idea. I rolled it out in a staff meeting, and then the one teacher who got upset, rightfully so, was my idea impacted her space and her plan and her fundraising. And in the staff meeting, I could just see it on her face. I was like, oh, what did I do? So I had to go eat crow and grovel at her feet a little bit, but we're good now. And just got to go slow to go fast. That's kind of what I'm hearing. And if I could simplify it to that, is you have to take the time to talk to people and listen to people and know where their hearts are and what buy-in you can collect before you roll out what you think is a great idea. Because just because it's your great idea doesn't mean it's going to land with anyone else.
You know what? I've stepped into that a few times in my leadership journey, and just like you, it's not intentional to hurt anybody, and you can't always know when something's going to impact everybody. And I would say it's going to happen, but it. So mine was moving a lady's room, and I think I told that story before, moving Miss Jane's classroom, and just didn't think that it would be a big deal. So you just don't always know, but yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
All right, next, who didn't go? Let me think. Of course, they're not going to say anything, but you guys keep moving around on my screen. Let me see. Josh, you talked. Shauna
Nope,
Craft.
I have not talked yet.
Okay,
So
and Shauna hasn't either. Shauna did. Okay, you guys need to stand still. You keep switching spots. All right, go, Josh.
really being explicit about what we're taking off people's plate. I think that, that often is it really alleviates a lot of anxiety, because I know teachers often feel that we are just piling thing after thing after thing after thing after thing, when the reality is those bottom couple things are now no longer needed. And that being explicit and saying, hey, we're not doing this anymore, or this takes priority, really alleviates a lot of change. But I think and so that was the one takeaway. The other Kyle said it is go slow to go fast. My last superintendent had the opposite view, and nothing that he really did lasted. He left mid-year, and by the end of mid-January, a lot of people we weren't doing what he had put into place in 2-3 weeks.
Yeah.
So getting that buy-in, and we've all eaten crow a couple times because of unintended side effects when we don't include the other people.
Yeah. And and I just think that that's going to happen from time to time, just because you just can't think of everything. But I think the more we train our brains to be inclusive, it'll happen less and less. But
It'll happen less and less, but then also they see a pattern of you working to include and think about those things. And so then there is that grace later on when you do forget.
yes, very good point. Very good point. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Did I skip anybody? Anything for the good of the order before we say goodbye on this day where I have no internet, but we made it through anyway? Thank you guys a ton. I shall see you next month. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.